My name's Marilyn Emery. I'm the President and CEO of Women's College Hospital. So as all of us know, Saturday, March the 8th is International Women's Day. As a world leader in women's health and in keeping with our mission to advance and advocate for the health of all women, Women's College celebrates this day each year with important discourse on a significant and current issue that is impacting women. This year, we are really pleased to be hosting this unique discussion on the pervasive and long-standing problem of violence against women. Women's College Hospital has consistently spoken out about gender-based violence and supported survivors through their journeys. Our Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Care Centre was the first hospital-based program in Ontario to provide emergency care, counselling, and follow-up to clients who have experienced sexual assault and domestic violence. Today, this service continues to provide around-the-clock expert care, and through this service, we see every day the trauma and the struggles that patients of this program experience as victims of abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So we do know how vitally important it is for us, all of us, to continue talking about this issue and to keep raising awareness. We've recently received many enthusiastic and grateful messages of support about today's panel. In particular, Tracy McCharles, Minister of Children and Youth Services and Minister responsible for women's issues, has sent a letter of greeting that I would like to share with you. I would like to extend warm greetings to everyone attending today's panel discussion presented by Women's College Hospital. Beyond the headlines, how high-profile cases are drawing attention to the complex issues surrounding violence against women. It was only last December that Premier Wynne and I were at Women's College Hospital to announce that the Ontario government would report back to the public on a series of initiatives that would combat sexual violence and harassment before International Women's Day. Our goal is the same as everyone in attendance today, to end sexual assault and harassment, and to help Ontario citizens live, work, and learn free from fear of sexual violence. Today's panel is an excellent way to raise awareness about the impact of gender-based violence. I am pleased that Women's College Hospital has brought together investigative journalists, health professionals, and members of advocacy groups to generate discussion and to shed light on this important social issue. Violence against women is a very serious problem that crosses every socioeconomic and cultural boundary, and it will not be tolerated in Ontario. As the Minister responsible for women's issues, I feel it is imperative that all women in Ontario feel safe in their homes, in their workplaces, and in their communities. By working together, we can continue to raise awareness, prevent violence from happening, and provide support to those who need it. Thank you to Women's College. Thank you to the panel members and to everyone involved in putting this important discussion together. Please accept my best wishes to all for a successful event. I would also like to take a moment to thank the YWCA for making this beautiful space available to us today, and I will just simply say it's no coincidence that we are here at the YWCA holding this panel. The YWCA has been for a century and a half the advocate for these issues and is just a superb partner for Women's College on many fronts. So I would now like to call Dr. Valerie Taylor to the podium. Dr. Taylor is the psychiatrist in chief at Women's College Hospital, and she's today's moderator.
Thank you and welcome everybody. I know it's always difficult to come to an event at the end of your workday, and I really appreciate the time people are taking to be here for what we think is a really important event. So today, as was indicated, we're going to look beyond the headlines and try to move some conversations forward about what we think is a really important issue, and we have a great panel to help kickstart that discussion. I'm going to introduce our panel. Before I do, I'd like to also highlight some very important people in our audience. And sometimes it can be very difficult to discuss some of the issues that we're talking about today, especially if you have been directly impacted or you know of someone who has. And so we have some volunteers from Women's College Hospital who've kindly agreed to be here. Ladies in the back, if you just want to stand up, wave your hands. So if anybody needs to take a break, kind of walk outside, get grounded, just get kind of control of sort of whatever it is that you're having difficulty with, please feel free. There's some space outside, and we can, these ladies in the back will help you kind of deal with the issues that you're grappling with. So thank you, ladies, for agreeing to do that. So to introduce our panel, so we have speaking with us today Donovan, who many of you, if not, have kind of heard about. You've definitely read some of his work. Kevin is a reporter and an editor with the Toronto Star and was one of the key people instrumental in writing about the Jian Ghomeshi story, which started a lot of these conversations. And in fact, we really appreciate that work. It's really kickstarted some important kind of dialogue, and we also know, I found out today, congratulations, that Kevin and his colleagues at the Toronto Star have received the 2015 Canadian Hillman Prize in Journalism for their work in sexual assault, looking at sexual assault and harassment in Canada. So again, and Kevin's going to be speaking briefly just about his experiences and discussing some of the barriers that you've seen that exist in covering gender-based violence and sexual assault. We're also really pleased to have with us Nneka MacGregor. Nneka is a longtime advocate and executive director of the Women's Centre for Social Justice, better known to those of us kind of in the industry as Women at the Centre. And she does really great advocacy work, helping women navigate what can be a very complicated journey once they've decided to disclose about sexual assault. And Nneka's going to share her lived experiences and speak about some of the power structures that prevent women from going forward and being heard. And I got to see Nneka before meeting her. She recently was profiled as part of a 16:9 segment talking about this issue. So again, clearly there's some dialogue happening around this. And our third panel member is somebody I do know very well. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Classen, who is the research director of our trauma program, does a lot of work in this area. Earlier, I guess in 2014, actually spoke at the UN around issues related to trauma, again, profiling kind of the work that we're doing here and just how important this whole conversation is. And Catherine's going to talk to us about just her experiences working with victims of violence, some of the things that prevent survivors from coming forward, and just the need for healthcare professionals to adjust their approaches when we talk to these clients so we don't re-traumatize them during the process in which we're supposed to be helping them heal. So I want to get this underway. We have some great people to hear from. So I'm going to open it up to you first, Kevin.
Thank you very much. They give these journalism awards out, and I often think that the awards really should go to the people that provide us with the information, whether it be on Jian Ghomeshi, campus sexual assault, Rob Ford, Orange Air Ambulance, or any other of the many stories that I've been involved with over the years. Really, the award should go to the people that talk to us. It's very difficult for people to talk to us about these things, so they should get the Hillman. In the mid-1990s, the Toronto Star embarked on an ambitious project. For 1 week, 3 reporters went into Toronto courthouses and collected information on every single domestic violence case that happened over a 7-day period. I was the editor of that project. You were very helpful to us, and I appreciate that. The three reporters followed these cases, and there were 133 of them that happened in one average week. This was, I think we had computers at the time in the early 90s. We had a spreadsheet. We were dimly aware of how to use it. We got the names of the accused, the names of the victims. We were there every day watching what happened in each of the cases. And at the end of it, we published a series of stories that we called 7 Days. It was an expose on the domestic violence justice system, or rather, what at the time was a rather broken system. The reporters found in their research that most of the cases fell apart, and the majority of them fell apart because the victim felt pressured into recanting her testimony. There actually were a few men that were victims, but it was primarily women, and they recanted. The series of stories the reporters wrote led to special training for police and crowns, and also the creation of domestic violence courts. Probably the most important thing about stories like this, and you referenced the Ghomeshi stories, is the public awareness. It tells people that you're not alone out there when you're facing these difficult issues. I was reflecting the other day on that when asked to speak here, and I thought that at no time do I recall in the year that we investigated this the following issues being raised. Number one, I don't recall anybody saying, why did the woman stay with the abusive partner? And number two, I don't recall anybody saying, why on earth did someone not make complaints to the police earlier? Yet in our coverage of the Ghomeshi case, and feel free to ask me questions about it during the Q&A period, we heard those questions a lot. I certainly heard them a lot. People were very critical of the women who came forward. Why were they not giving their names? Why were they not giving more detail on their stories? Well, they did actually give a lot of detail, more detail than I have ever shared, more detail than I was allowed to share. We couldn't share it because it would identify them. Well, enter sex. The topic of sex and the BDSM lifestyle that Jian Ghomeshi infamously referred to in his Facebook missive. You see, in our investigation, 7 Days in the 90s, sex was not really part of it. I suspect the couples were at some point having sex, but that wasn't part of the investigation. It was an investigation of domestic violence. And it seemed to be understood that the women in the abusive relationships were naturally fearful of leaving, of speaking out. But with Ghomeshi, who had this sexual, almost Svengali hold on the women, I found that people too often question why these people didn't leave, didn't go to the police. I understood why they didn't. It made total sense to me. But really, the backlash we got, it didn't rival the backlash we got on the Ford case, which was off the charts. But believe me, there were a lot of people, particularly in the early days of this Ghomeshi story, calling me, emailing me, vicious tweets out there. You know, why won't these women come forward? You know, where are their names? And I found that offensive, quite frankly. For the women that I interviewed, that's my dog. I've got to. Can we? No, I was kidding. For the women I interviewed, I think that is a small white dog. Sounds like. For the women that I interviewed, there were frightening consequences for them. Would they be believed? Would they be trashed on social media? And more that, I mean, I have been reporting for 30 years. I'm almost 53. The social media thing is all new, right? But it's a very real concern. And as one woman said, do I really want to be involved, Kevin, in a court case that could last several years and have my whole life dissected? In writing the stories, I included a paragraph, and I'll just mention this as an aside, that was completely misunderstood. I don't know if any of you recall it, but I wrote, the victims, who were all educated and unemployed, or educated and employed, did not want to be identified. And people wrongly assumed that I was saying that if they were unemployed and uneducated, they would want to be. I didn't, but I'm sure there were 1,000 complaints. That's not what I meant. I meant that when I was interviewing, they said, look, I've got a good job. I'm in a stable relationship now. I went to university. I really don't want my life spread out. So, word to the wise: be careful every word you write these days, particularly. these women were really fearful that if they spoke out and were known to be speaking out, that bad things would happen to them. And I suspect that in many cases they were probably quite right. As you all know, one woman, actually two, came forward quite quickly in that first week. Lucy Decatur, who's an actor with the Trailer Park Boys, came out and talked, and that really changed the conversation. But she felt that she could do that, and she felt it was the right thing to do, and still does to this day. But in the end, the women who initially talked to us because they had a hope that somehow we would be able to get the word out about this person who the allegations are, of course, before the court, but in their minds was a sexual predator. And they wanted the story to come out. And boy, did it ever come out, actually. Our campus investigation, done by two great reporters on my team, Jamie Poisson and Emily Mathieu, involves very similar issues. In brief, if you didn't see it, it was a series of stories about campus sexual violence and the lack of policies at our universities and colleges to deal with just the initial complaints. The reporters were able to get three women to come forward. Two spoke on camera. One was in she was in sort of dark shadows. But two came forward and told their stories, and their stories were, yes, about abuse, but also about the lack of support that they felt. And really, I like to think that it's more those stories that we published. I purposely published right after the Ghomeshi story that really caught the Premier's attention, I think. 30 years as a reporter next month, hopefully 30 more in me. I have never had a more difficult, more upsetting story to deal with. I am not a trained grief counselor like the people we have up here. I don't have any sort of CV beyond being a reporter for 30 years. And this case is before the courts, but I will tell you that the allegations, you've read about them, they're worse. And they're allegations that some will just never see the light of day because women, for very good reasons, didn't feel they could come forward. They felt demeaned. They were certainly abused physically. And like I said, I've never dealt with a worse case in my time as a reporter, and I hope to not ever again. Anyways, thank you all for coming out, and I'll be happy later on to answer any of your questions.
So thank you very much, Kevin. I can already think of about 10 things that I want to ask, so I know that we're going to be in for a lively discussion. I'm going to ask our next panelist to come up and speak briefly as well. Nneka?
Thank you. Oops. I'm short, so I want to start by thanking Women's College for the honour of coming to speak to you all today. And I don't usually write things out because I prefer to sort of speak on the spot, and I usually talk about whatever it is that takes my spirit. So what has taken my spirit today? I'm a survivor, and I'm a survivor of all forms of intimate partner abuse, including the topic that we're talking about. I am an individual who has experienced a lot in my own personal life. But the reason why I started doing the advocacy was really complicated and had a lot to do with the way the system intervened and the expectation that I had of what I thought the system would be doing and what the system actually did. But before I get to that, I actually want to take up on a couple of points that Kevin made. We have just completed a one-year court watch program of the domestic violence courts in 3 courts in Toronto. And our report is coming out in about 2 weeks, so we are going to talk.
Can we get a copy?
You will get a copy. And our report is actually called Still Unbalanced, and looking at the situations in the 3 courts in Toronto, in the Toronto region. And unfortunately, what we found is that a lot of the challenges that were around in the 90s that Kevin and his team were working on are still around today. And I think that's because the systemic issues that women face are still there. Very little has changed, even though there is a lot of advocacy around it. But I am a woman who is filled with hope and I'm a woman who is filled with fire and a little bit of anger. So I like to talk about, start with a quote that Winston Churchill is famous for saying around, it takes courage to stand up and speak, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen. And as a survivor, the courage that lives in me and all the other women who have experienced one form of violence or another, the courage it takes for us to stand up and to talk about our experience is incredible. And the reason why I continue to do the work is because I find myself daily surrounded by incredibly courageous women, other women survivors who've experienced this. But on the other side, it's the courage of workers, right, system individuals who actually sit and listen and are kind and are compassionate and are willing to support us as we navigate all the challenges that we face after the violence and the abuse. So it's about courage, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also about how do you speak up against the silence? There's this sense of oppression on the individual that makes you want to go into your room, get into your bed, get under the covers, and not come out. What is it that makes women get up and come out and start fighting? And that is really about a sense of justice. Because if I don't speak, if I don't use what has happened to me, if I don't use it to bring about change, nothing will be different in the world that my children go into. I've got 3 awesome kids, 2 daughters and a son, and I do this work because of them. I do this work so that my daughters will never end up in a situation where some man feels that he has the right to violate and torture and abuse, and they will have no recourse. I do this so that my son will grow in a world and have the voice and the courage himself as a man to speak up and to speak out in support of his sisters and other women, not just his sisters and his mother, but all women. I think it's really important when we talk about the high-profile cases, the Jian Ghomeshis, the Ray Rice, the, what's a chap in the States? Bill Cosby, thank you very much. These high-profile individuals, they serve a purpose because it does alert the public, right? It wakes us up in ways that we otherwise would not be paying attention. But my concern and my reality is that it is the ordinary man, the everyday ordinary man who is at university campuses, who is a colleague at work, right? Who is your physician, who is your friend. It is that ordinary man who is going around on a daily basis, violating women. And my wish, and this is the challenge again, and I understand it because I'm not a journalist, but this is my wish for the media, is that they pay attention to these ordinary men who are violating ordinary women. And whilst it isn't every woman who has been violated, any woman is susceptible. Whilst it isn't every man who will violate, there are those who do, and we all as a society have to hold them accountable. I look out, every time I speak, I'm always mindful of the men in the room. I always like to take a sort of a quick poll to see how many men have shown up on days like this, because this is usually seen as a women's issue, but it bloody well is not. This is a man's issue. It's about men. And my whole wish is that the men in our lives, the men in the community, are able to stand up with that same courage and stand and support women and stand and say and challenge their peers and say to them, this is not acceptable because I have a mother, I have a sister, I have a daughter, I have a best friend. And they too, these women, deserve to live lives that are full and fearless. These women deserve to live lives just as privileged as we, the men. And so my challenge to every man in this room is that you go out and you bring your voice towards us. You bring your voice to this issue. Because without you, Those few, and I really believe it is the few who are violent, who are abusers, but it is the few that do the most damage. It is the few whose actions cost all of us. And our role as women survivors is to make sure that what we have suffered, the trauma that we have suffered, counts for something. It doesn't go unpunished. It doesn't go unnoticed. And so I want a world, it sounds really naive, but I'm going to say it. I want a world where women are free. I believe that this world can happen. I believe that it can exist, but it can't unless we all work together. And I think the media has such a critical, pivotal role to play in this, not just on those high-profile instances, but every time they hear it, every time they hear about it, they report it, they put it out there and engage in the discourse. I think my 10 minutes is up. I want the conversation to continue. I am here. I disclose every time that I'm a survivor because I want people to know, who is this woman? What does she look like? Right? Good-looking women, short women, tall women, educated women, women who are poor, women who are wealthy. All of us have experienced something that we need to stand up and speak about because I am no longer ashamed. And I have nothing to be ashamed of. I didn't do anything wrong. So whenever it comes to the choice to speak or not, I put my courage cloak on and I say, I will speak because I did nothing wrong. Thank you.
Always a very powerful message, Nneka. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker, and then we'll open up the audience for discussion with all of our panelists. So, Catherine, please.
Thank you. It's also a great privilege to be here and to share this panel with Kevin and Nneka. I am so excited to be here to talk about what I want to talk about. I usually don't write out what I'm going to say, but I didn't want to miss anything, so bear with me as I read my comments. I'd like to offer another lens through which to consider the complex issues surrounding violence against women. Our society suffers from what's been described by scholars and researchers as a hidden epidemic. That hidden epidemic is childhood trauma. We now have plenty of research to demonstrate that childhood trauma is associated with almost every health condition you can think of, including cancer, heart disease, obesity, autoimmune disease, on a wide range of mental health conditions. It's also associated with reproductive health problems, behavioral problems, and it's associated with re-victimization in adulthood. According to a recent Canadian study, 1 in 3 Canadians report a history of child abuse, which included either being physically abused, being sexually abused, or being in a household where there was intimate partner violence. There are gender differences in child abuse. Girls are more likely to experience sexual assault, while boys are more likely to witness violence. Here's a stunning statistic. If you have a history of sexual victimization in childhood or adolescence, then you are 2 to 14 times more likely to be sexually victimized as an adult. Equally stunning is a finding from the 1993 prevalence study on violence in Canada, where they found that 1 in 2 women have experienced at least one episode of violence as an adult. Think about it, 1 in 2 women. What does this all mean? It means that a large proportion of women in our society have not only experienced violence as adults, but they have also been victimized as children. Now, what difference does this make, you might ask? Plenty. While even a single episode of violence against a woman is a devastating experience, I think it is important to understand the pernicious effect of violence that begins in childhood and how it affects women throughout their lives. Our conversation about violence against women has to include a recognition of the compounding effect that prior traumatic experiences have for women who are victims of violence. We now know the devastating effects of child abuse, effects that persist into adulthood, we know that child abuse affects the development of the brain, which can explain why survivors of child abuse can have problems with managing their emotions, with feeling safe in the world, and even with feeling safe in their bodies. We know that chronic child abuse can shatter the psyche such that the person does not have a coherent sense of self. We know that it can reduce a person's capacity to recognize danger. It can result in a person believing that pain and punishment are normal and that they deserve it. It can mean that they believe they don't have the right to say no. It can mean that they live with shame and guilt about what happened to them, even though it wasn't their fault. Imagine how the survivor of child abuse reacts to victimization as an adult. Not only must she deal with the impact of assault in the present, but she also has the cascade of memories, emotions, and beliefs related to her history to compound the impact of the latest assault. The terror and confusion renders most women incapable of doing little more than getting through the day, if they can even manage that. What do we do about this? What do we do about the fact that a large percentage of the general population has a history of trauma? Given the prevalence of trauma within our society, we have to become a society that's trauma-informed. It's time that we educated the general public about the devastating effects of abuse and how pervasive a problem this is. It's time we educated all service providers about trauma and how to provide trauma-informed care. We have to bring trauma-informed care into our healthcare system, into our social services, into our educational system, and perhaps especially into our criminal justice system. I read in the Star yesterday about a woman who's trying to introduce a universal symbol to indicate that she has an invisible disability, and to please treat such individuals with extra care and understanding. Living with a history of chronic traumatization is an invisible disability. Now, we could spend a full day talking about trauma-informed care and what it involves, and obviously I can't do that today. But what I can say is that trauma-informed care means delivering care or any kind of human service in a manner that is based on an understanding of the impact of trauma. Being knowledgeable about the prevalence of trauma means that the human service provider will assume that there is a good chance that the person he or she is dealing with has a trauma history. And based on this assumption, the provider will take universal precautions. Just as the medical professional has learned to don gloves when handling bodily fluids, the provider will deliver care in a way to prevent re-traumatization. These universal precautions are important not only because of the high prevalence of trauma, but because even if we ask if there is a history of trauma, the person might not feel safe enough to reveal this fact, or might not even know consciously about their trauma history because the survivor has repressed memories of her abuse. The service provider must engage with the person in a way that allows the survivor to feel safe. The interactions should be collaborative and take the individual's perspective into account. The provider should offer an opportunity for choice as opposed to having no say in the situation. Service providers should engage in a way that demonstrates they are trustworthy and reliable. And finally, these encounters with providers should leave the survivor feeling empowered rather than disempowered. Violating any of these principles puts the individual at risk of re-traumatization. It puts the survivor at risk of having that cascade of trauma symptoms swallow them up in the present moment. When we think about what it means for a woman to take action against her perpetrator and how the system is most certainly not set up to support her, it is no wonder that engaging in the criminal justice system is re-traumatizing for women. And it is no wonder that few women want to pursue this line of action. Sadly, this leaves women at greater risk because perpetrators can act with impunity. Which brings me to these high-profile cases and the role of the media. First, let me say, as someone who works with women who are survivors of child abuse, These high-profile cases and the media attention given to them often cause a lot of distress. They serve as reminders of their own abuse and can trigger flashbacks, nightmares, and a general fear response. As important as it is that the general public learns about these cases, I think it is important to remember that these stories can affect a lot of people in deeply personal and distressing ways. It is not simply that trauma survivors are reminded of their own trauma histories when they learn about another perpetrator and one or more victims. It is also the way in which these stories are often presented in the media. We live in a culture that tends to blame the victim. We're all familiar with this. We've heard about it today. She asked for it, it was consensual, she's lying, she was a jilted lover with an axe to grind. While I believe the media is becoming increasingly sensitized to these issues, we have a long way to go. Feminist analyses of media accounts of violence against women suggest that there are many subtle ways in which the media downplays the seriousness of sexual assault. For example, by using the word fondle as opposed to the word grope. Fondle suggests a loving, gentle act, whereas grope conveys this is an unwanted sexual act. Language can also subtly blame the victim. For example, using the word alleged to describe the sexual assault, rather than saying that the survivor said she had been sexually assaulted. Alleged conveys that the reporter may question the truth of the event, whereas using said is neutral. The media is a powerful tool that we all know can shape public opinion. We need the media to be reflective and responsive and to hold their reporting to the highest standards. I do want to say that I'm grateful for the signs of the media's growing awareness of these issues. For instance, today, a story in the Star today on a high-profile child pornographer begins with the tagline, "Warning, graphic content." This is extremely helpful for trauma survivors who are easily triggered and so now can avoid reading this disturbing story. But let's talk some more about the big stories that have hit the news. The Jian Ghomeshi story, Bill Cosby, and those other high-profile cases, they're of course abhorrent and deeply disturbing, but they also present an opportunity. This is an opportunity for the media to do more than sell papers or for TV networks to increase their viewership. It is an opportunity and perhaps even a responsibility to educate the public. It is an opportunity to provide the general public with knowledge about the impact of trauma, to educate it about its presence within our society, to remove the blinders that keep us from acknowledging about how pervasive it is, to help us understand how we all suffer the consequences, to help us recognize the economic impact it has on our healthcare system because of the extraordinary healthcare and mental health needs of trauma survivors, on how it leads to a reliance on social services because of the disability that often results from being a trauma survivor, on the lost productivity of so many of our citizens who are struggling to heal from these experiences, on our criminal justice system, which sees far too many trauma survivors imprisoned because they did not get the help they needed to deal with their trauma histories. This is a huge cost to our society on so many levels. Ultimately, this is not just a women's issue. It affects us all.